Hello everyone. Let's get started today. Stories about racist manager kicks out store owner. But wait until you see what happens next. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for more inspiring stories that remind us all of the power of generosity. Jason Westbrook struggles with racism. Jason Westbrook had always known that the world was not going to hand him success on a silver platter. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Brooklyn, he was acutely aware of the weight his skin carried with it. From an early age, Jason learned that his potential was often measured not by his talent, work ethic, or dreams, but by the color of his skin. For many, it was an assumption, a stereotype, one that had the power to define his future before he even had a chance to start. As a child, Jason had been taught to be resilient. His parents, both hard-working immigrants, encouraged him to never back down, to always fight for what he wanted. Yet, despite their unwavering support, the reality of racism and prejudice was undeniable. Teachers in school told him to dream within reason when he spoke about his ambition to become a businessman. They told him to set his sights lower, to aim for something more practical, as though his dream of success was an impossible fantasy. Classmates, many of them white, looked at him with skepticism, as if his ambition was something laughable, something that didn't belong to someone like him. They didn't see Jason for the person he was. They saw a black kid from the projects. And for them, that was all he would ever be. But Jason was determined. Even as a child, he understood that dreams weren't meant to be handed to you, they were meant to be fought for. His parents worked tirelessly to give him opportunities they never had, and he had every intention of not letting their sacrifices be in vain. He didn't let their doubts or anyone else's define him. He worked hard, pushing through the barriers that others tried to place in front of him. Jason knew what he was capable of and refused to let his race be the chain that bound him to the limitations others placed on him. He dreamed bigger than they could imagine, and with relentless drive, he slowly chipped away at the walls that sought to keep him from succeeding. Years later, after overcoming countless challenges, Jason Westbrook found himself at the helm of a multi-million-dollar luxury retail empire. His stores, a collection of high-end boutiques, spanned from New York to Los Angeles. He was now a man who had proven not just to the world but also to himself that he could rise above the obstacles that had been set before him. From a child who was told to dream realistically to a businessman who was now shaping an empire, Jason had come a long way. But even as his success grew, so too did the insidious whispers of racism that lingered in the background of his life. It wasn't always as overt as it had been when he was younger, but it was there, subtle and deeply ingrained, always trying to undermine him, even as he climbed higher. It was a kind of racism that wasn't as blatant as the insults and slurs of his youth, but it was there in the small, cutting moments. It was in the looks people gave him when he entered a room, those quick, dismissive glances, the subtle shifts in posture that told him, without words, that he didn't belong. It was in the way some of his colleagues, when discussing business deals, would glance at him and speak to him with a condescension, as though questioning whether someone like him truly deserved to sit at the table. It was the way he could walk into any of his stores in a tailored suit, yet still be treated with suspicion, as if somehow his status wasn't enough to earn him a place in the luxury world he had built. No matter how successful he was, no matter how many million-dollar deals he closed, it seemed that there was always a part of him that people saw only for the color of his skin. But what truly hurt, what really stung, was that racism wasn't just something he encountered in the world outside his business. It existed in his own company, in his own stores, places where he had worked so hard to create a culture of inclusion and excellence. As a black man who had earned his position, Jason's entire philosophy was built on the belief that luxury was not exclusive to any one race or social class. His stores were meant to be spaces where anyone from any background could walk in and feel welcomed, valued, and respected. But even in his own empire, Jason realized that prejudice was still alive and well. It existed in the hearts and minds of some of his employees, people who should have known better, people who were part of the very culture he had created. The reality was that no amount of success could shield him from the deep-seated biases that ran through the fabric of society. It was as if no matter how far he went, there was always someone, whether it was a colleague, a customer, or an employee, who saw him not as Jason Westbrook, the owner of an empire, but as a black man who had somehow managed to fit into a world where he didn't belong. And the more successful he became, the more it seemed like people were waiting for him to fail, waiting for him to prove that he didn't belong, that his success was a fluke. In the corridors of his own stores, Jason was still not immune to the biases of others. The whispers about one of his store managers, Alex Mitchell, particularly stung. Alex was a talented manager. His sales numbers were impressive, and his ability to foster high-end client relationships was unmatched. But behind the polished facade, Jason had begun to hear troubling rumors about Alex's attitude towards certain customers, especially those who didn't fit the typical profile of a luxury shopper. The more Jason listened, the more he suspected that Alex's behavior was not just about poor customer service, it was rooted in prejudice. And that hit Jason harder than he could have ever imagined. How could someone who worked for him, under the very brand he had built, be contributing to a toxic atmosphere of exclusion and judgment? Jason had worked too hard to build his business on the principles of respect and inclusivity to allow such attitudes to flourish under his watch. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about one store manager. It was a reflection of a larger issue, one that was deeply personal to it. It wasn't just about the success of his business anymore. It was about confronting the discrimination that still lurked, even in the places he had created to be a safe haven for all. Jason had built his empire from the ground up, but now, even with all the success, he had to face the truth. The fight against racism didn't end when he reached the top. It was something he would always have to confront. In his mind, Jason knew the journey wasn't over. Racism was something that would always be there, lurking in the background, waiting for him to let his guard down. But he wasn't going to let it define him. His success was not just the product of his hard work. It was also a testament to the strength of his spirit, his refusal to let the world dictate his worth. As he stood in front of his office window, watching the city bustle below, Jason understood that while the fight against racism would never be easy, it was a fight worth fighting, because every step he took was one more step toward breaking the chains of prejudice, not just for himself, but for everyone who came after him. In the end, Jason Westbrook's struggle with racism wasn't just a personal battle. It was a call to action. It was a reminder that no matter how far you climb, the world will continue to challenge you, sometimes in ways you least expect. But if you have the courage to face those challenges head-on, to fight for the respect and dignity you deserve, you can change not only your own future but also the future of those who will follow in your footsteps. Undercover investigation. Jason Westbrook had always trusted his instincts. Over the years, he had learned to listen to the small, almost imperceptible whispers of intuition that guided him through the complicated world of luxury retail. But when rumors about one of his flagship stores in Soho reached him, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a clamor of dissonance that he could no longer ignore. For weeks, employees had quietly spoken of a toxic environment at that particular location, an atmosphere that seemed to turn cold and dismissive toward customers who didn't fit a certain mold. Jason had built his business on the principle that luxury should be inclusive, a place where anyone, regardless of their background or appearance, could feel welcome. He prided himself on the diversity of his clientele and the warmth of his stores. But in the heart of his empire, something was amiss. The whispers about his manager, Alex Mitchell, hinted at something deeper, an underlying prejudice that wasn't just about poor customer service, but was rooted in a culture of exclusion. Jason had always known that success in the luxury industry didn't shield you from racism. It just cloaked it in subtler forms. But this was different. This wasn't just about a single incident. It was about an atmosphere that seemed to permeate the store. Jason was no stranger to being treated unfairly in high-end spaces. Even with his millions, his achievements, and his position as a leader in luxury retail, he had often been met with the subtle but sharp sting of racism. He had become accustomed to being watched a little too closely when he entered a store, or to being treated as if his presence was an anomaly. It wasn't overt. There were no explicit slurs or insults, but it was there, in the way people looked at him, in the assumptions they made about his worth. But he had long fought against those feelings of inadequacy, determined to prove that his success was earned, not given. Now, he was faced with the possibility that the very culture he had worked so hard to build might harbor a kind of prejudice he had spent his life trying to escape. It was a possibility he couldn't ignore. So Jason decided to take matters into his own hands. He needed to see it for himself, not as the CEO of his own empire, but as just another customer walking through the door. He had done it before, early in his career, when he was just starting to build his brand. Back then, he would visit stores disguised as a regular shopper to assess customer service and see how his business was perceived. But this time, it wasn't about gauging service quality or store aesthetics. This was personal. He needed to understand the truth about what was happening in his own stores. In a place where he had hoped to create an inclusive environment, Jason wasn't naive. He knew that people who held certain biases often didn't see things the way they truly were. And he knew that, as a black man, he could walk into his own store and be treated differently, depending on how people perceived him. So, he decided to go undercover, to walk through the store's doors as just another face in the crowd, someone who could blend in, unnoticed. The idea of having to hide his true identity, to be seen as anything other than the powerful businessman he was, left a bitter taste in his mouth. But it was necessary. In order to root out the truth, he would have to mask his identity. That night, as he prepared for his mission, Jason was struck by the stark irony of the situation. A man who had built an empire from the ground up, who could afford anything in his store, would now have to disguise himself just to be treated fairly. He stood in front of his mirror, the reflection of a man who had achieved more than most could ever dream, and yet here he was, preparing to be invisible. He slipped into a plain black hoodie, jeans, and sneaker snow designer labels. No luxury accessories. He even left his prized Rolex behind, opting instead for a modest wristwatch that didn't scream wealth. It was a subtle change, but in this case, it was everything. As he adjusted the hood over his head, he couldn't help but think of the times in his life when he had been followed through stores, when sales associates had dismissed him or looked at him with suspicion because of his appearance. Those memories still stung, even after all he had accomplished. Jason knew that this wasn't just about catching Alex Mitchell in the act. This was about confronting something deeper, something that had followed him his whole life, the belief that a black man didn't belong in certain spaces, no matter how much success he had achieved. He knew the game, had played it all his life, but now he was going to play it on his own terms. As he walked through the streets of Soho toward the store, he felt a familiar knot in his stomach. The Soho store was one of his pride and joy, sleek, modern, and a showcase of everything he had worked for. It was a high-traffic location, drawing tourists, locals, and Manhattan's elite. But as Jason stepped through the glass doors, he immediately felt the shift in energy. The store that should have welcomed him, that should have reflected the inclusivity his brand stood for, felt cold and uninviting. No one acknowledged his presence. No one greeted him. The sales associates were busy fawning over a wealthy-looking couple in designer suits, their smiles wide and their attention fully captured. But Jason, in his plain hoodie and sneakers, was invisible. His presence was an afterthought. He walked through the store slowly, browsing the displays, letting the silence hang in the air. The polished marble floors, the sleek displays, everything about the store screamed luxury. But the luxury felt empty. It wasn't just about the products. It was about the experience, the feeling of being seen, of being valued. Jason, despite all that he had accomplished, felt invisible. The sting was familiar, but it hurt nonetheless. He could feel the same coldness he had encountered countless times in his life, the same judgment, the same dismissal. And then he saw him. Alex Mitchell, the store manager, emerged from the staff area, his sharp suit and clean-cut appearance betraying a sense of authority and control. Jason knew exactly what was coming. Alex didn't see a potential customer. He saw a black man in a hoodie, standing in front of a $5,000 bag. In that moment, Jason could feel the judgment hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Alex's eyes locked onto him, and Jason knew that he was already being assessed, already being labeled. "Can I help you with something?" Alex asked, his tone clipped, almost condescending. He didn't look at Jason's eyes. He looked at his outfit, at his sneakers, at anything that would confirm his suspicions. It wasn't just a question, it was an assumption. Jason, forcing himself to remain calm, simply replied, "I'm just looking." He wasn't angry, was disappointed. He had expected this, but the reality of it still stung. Alex barely looked at the bag Jason was holding. His gaze flicked over it, then down to Jason's hoodie. "That's quite an expensive item. Are you sure it's in your price range?" Alex asked, his words dripping with a condescending tone. Jason, swallowing his frustration, kept his voice steady. "I know the price," he replied, his eyes never leaving Alex's. He wasn't going to let Alex's judgment affect him. But Jason knew this moment was bigger than him. It was about exposing the deep-rooted prejudice that existed in his store, in the industry, and in society. Alex's attitude didn't change. Jason, not wanting to escalate things in the moment, placed the bag back on the shelf and walked out. He left without revealing who he truly was, but in that moment, he made a silent vow to himself. Tomorrow would be different. The next day, Jason would return not as a quiet shopper, but as the owner of the entire empire, ready to confront Alex and teach him a lesson he would never forget. This undercover investigation wasn't just about one store manager's behavior. It was about confronting a problem that, despite his success, Jason had not yet been able to escape. The belief that someone like him didn't belong in certain spaces, no matter what he had accomplished. It was a problem Jason had fought all his life, and now he would take action. Confronting the manager. The next morning, Jason Westbrook stood in front of the mirror, dressed in one of his finest suits. The sharp navy fabric hugged his tall frame perfectly, and the polished leather shoes gleamed under the lights. He looked every bit the successful businessman. He was no longer just the kid from Brooklyn, who had been told to aim for something realistic. But today, his suit wasn't just for show. It wasn't about the luxury, the power, or the wealth it symbolized. It was about the lesson he was about to deliver on that, in a way, he had been preparing for his entire life. Jason had been wronged, not just as a businessman, but as a human being. The experiences of racism, prejudice, and dismissal that he had endured over the years had shaped him into the person he was today, but they had never fully healed. No matter how successful he became, no matter how many awards or accolades he earned, there was always a part of him that carried the weight of those moments when he had been made to feel invisible, unworthy, or less than. And yesterday, when Alex Mitchell, the manager of his flagship Soho store, had treated him like an outsider, despite the fact that he was the owner of the entire chain, it was a cruel reminder of a reality Jason had hoped he had escaped. It wasn't just about a bad customer service experience. It wasn't about being dismissed as someone who didn't belong. It was about something deeper, something that Jason had spent his life fighting against. The belief that, no matter how far he went, he would never truly be accepted in certain spaces. Yesterday, Alex had made that assumption about him without even giving him a chance. And for Jason, that was the last straw. This time, he would make sure Alex and everyone else in his company understood that such behavior would not be tolerated. As Jason entered the Soho store later that afternoon, he could feel the tension in the air. The store that had felt cold and unwelcoming the day before now seemed almost too eager. The staff, who had previously ignored him, now stood at attention. Smiles plastered on their faces as they tried to show the CEO just how well they could run things. Jason could almost feel their anxiety, their nervous energy, as if they were all trying to overcompensate for what had happened the day before. They didn't know what he was here for yet, but they were certainly going to try their hardest to make a good impression. Alex Mitchell was no exception. As Jason stepped inside, Alex appeared from the back of the store, his impeccable suit and carefully styled hair betraying a man who exuded control, power, and confidence at least on the surface. He walked up to Jason with a broad smile, extending his hand in greeting, the same hand that had, the day before, been used to usher him out of the store. "Mr. Westbrook," Alex said, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Welcome to the Soho store. We've been expecting you. We've been making sure everything is perfect for your visit." He was eager, almost desperate to prove himself, but Jason didn't return the smile. He didn't extend his hand. Instead, his gaze remained steady, locked onto Alex's, as if to remind him that this moment wasn't going to be like all the others. Jason wasn't here to play along with the formalities. He wasn't here to pretend that everything was fine. "I've heard a lot about this store," Jason said calmly, his voice carrying the weight of something far more important than a casual comment. "I wanted to see how things are running here." Alex puffed out his chest, clearly pleased to have the CEO's attention, and began to explain the store's operations with pride. "We run a tight ship here," Alex said, his voice carrying an air of superiority. "Our clients expect nothing but the best, and we make sure to deliver." He glanced around the store, gesturing to the displays and the staff, trying to impress Jason with every polished corner, every perfectly arranged product. But Jason wasn't interested in the aesthetics. He had seen it all before. What he was looking for wasn't in the display set, was in the way people were treated, in the way the staff interacted with the customers. "I had an interesting experience here yesterday," Jason said, his tone still calm, but now with an underlying firmness that spoke volumes. "I came in looking for a new bag, and I didn't exactly get the warm welcome I was expecting." Alex's smile faltered for just a moment. Jason could see the panic flicker in his eyes before he quickly recovered, his smile returning but less genuine now. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Perhaps it was a misunderstanding." He tried to brush it off, but Jason wasn't having it. "No misunderstanding," Jason replied, his eyes now narrowing, locking onto Alex's with a quiet intensity. "You personally escorted me out of the store yesterday. Do you remember?" Alex's face drained of color. The confident manager who had been so eager to impress was now visibly rattled, his composure slipping away in real time. He stepped back, taking in the full force of Jason's words. The realization hit him like a thunderclap, and Jason let the silence hang between them, allowing Alex to stew in the weight of the moment. Jason had been prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, he felt no satisfaction, no joy. This wasn't about getting revenge. It wasn't about making Alex feel small. It was about something much deeper lesson that needed to be learned. Jason wasn't looking for an apology. He wasn't looking for excuses. He wanted to make sure Alex understood the gravity of what he had done, and more importantly, what it meant for the people who walked through those doors every single day, people who deserved respect and kindness, no matter who they were or what they looked like. Alex, his face flushed red with embarrassment and fear, stammered, I didn't realize it was you. If I had known." "That's the point." Jason cut him off, his voice low but firm. "You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect. You assumed, based on how I looked, that I didn't belong here. You assumed I couldn't afford this store, and you treated me as less than. And you weren't subtle about it." The words hung in the air, like a heavy fog, suffocating everything around them. Jason could feel the tension rise in the room. The staff, who had been watching the exchange from a distance, now looked uncomfortable, shifting on their feet, glancing at one another. Jason knew this wasn't just a lesson for Alexit, was a lesson for everyone in the store. Alex, still struggling to maintain his composure, began to sputter apologies. "I didn't mean Topley's, Jason raised his hand, silencing him. "You're going to learn something today, Alex. You're going to stay here for the rest of the month. And during that time, you're going to greet every customer who walks through that door, every single one of them. And you're going to give them the same level of respect and service you would give to your most high-profile client. No exceptions." Alex's mouth opened and closed, his mind racing as he processed what Jason had just said. "But Mr. Westbrook, No buts," Jason interrupted, his voice steady and resolute. "If you can't treat every customer with respect, you'll be gone. And I'll make sure no one in this industry hires you again." Jason paused for a moment, letting the full weight of his words sink in. The power in the room had shifted. It wasn't about humiliation or punishment, it was about accountability. It was about teaching the lesson that had to be learned, not just for Alex, but for the entire company. He needed Alex to understand that the work he had done to build his business was founded on a core belief that everyone, no matter their race, class, or background, deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. "I'll be watching," Jason said, his tone final. "Do better, Alex. You have until the end of the month." As Jason turned and walked away, he could feel the eyes of the staff on his back. Their judgment had shifted, their respect for him deepened. This wasn't just about one store manager. This was about changing the culture of his entire business. Jason's lesson had been delivered, and he knew it wouldn't be forgotten. The path forward wasn't going to be easy, but at least now, things were starting to change. The power of respect and equality. Jason Westbrook had spent his entire life fighting for something more than success. For him, success had always been a given, something earned through relentless dedication, perseverance, and resilience. But there was something that mattered more, something that he had come to realize after all these years of building his empire: respect. Respect wasn't just an acknowledgement of his achievements, it was a recognition of his humanity, of his right to exist and thrive in spaces where people like him were often overlooked, dismissed, or ignored. It was about equality, not just for himself, but for everyone who walked through the doors of his stores, for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than. The events that unfolded at his Soho flagship store had been a wake-up call, a painful reminder of the underlying prejudices that still existed even in spaces that were supposed to celebrate luxury and exclusivity. Jason had built his business from the ground up, and the values that had driven him, hard work, integrity, and inclusivity, were woven into every aspect of his brand. But the harsh reality was that success in a world that still clung to racial bias didn't shield you from the judgment and assumptions of others. Jason knew this truth all too well, and the incident with his store manager, Alex Mitchell, had only crystallized the lesson he had learned over the years. Respect and equality were not just ideals to aspire to, they were the foundation on which everything else needed to stand. The moment when Alex had made that assumption about Jason, when he had dismissed him simply because of his appearance, was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't just about the words Alex had spoken or the way he had treated him. It was about the fact that in that instant, Jason was stripped of his identity as the successful businessman, the entrepreneur who had built an empire. Instead, he was reduced to something less, something smaller, something that didn't belong. That kind of treatment wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was a reflection of the unspoken beliefs that still shaped how people viewed others, based on the color of their skin, their socio-economic background, or their appearance. And for Jason, it was a painful reminder that no matter how much he achieved, there would always be those who saw him as something less. But Jason was not a man who would allow that to define him. Instead, he used it as fuel to reinforce the values that had guided him all his life. He didn't want his empire to be just a place where wealth and luxury were the ultimate currency. He wanted it to be a space where regardless of who they were, where they came from, or how they looked, was treated with the same level of respect. The incident with Alex had been the catalyst for something much larger than a single confrontation. It had forced him to confront not only the biases within his company, but also the biases that existed in the world at large. It was a wake-up call for him, but it was also an opportunity to create change. Jason knew that the problem wasn't just about one store manager or a single incident. It was about an entire culture that allowed such attitudes to fester. The way Alex had behaved was a reflection of a larger issue that existed not just in his store, but across many of the spaces that Jason had worked so hard to build, and that, to him, was unacceptable. He couldn't allow his company, his brand, to perpetuate the same toxic mindset that had so often held him back throughout his life. He couldn't let the same prejudices that he had fought against as a young man, those subtle, insidious forms of racism, part of the very fabric of his business. It was not enough to simply punish Alex, to fire him and move on. Jason knew that real change required more than that. It required accountability, but also education, and a commitment to doing better not just for himself, but for everyone who walked through the doors of his stores. Alex had to learn what it meant to serve every customer, regardless of their background, with the same level of respect and care. But more than that, Jason wanted to send a message to his entire company that the values of respect, equality, and inclusivity were non-negotiable. And so, Jason made a decision that would forever change the culture of his company. He mandated a company-wide diversity and inclusion training program, one that would not only address the biases that existed within his staff, but would also help them understand the impact of their actions on the customers who trusted his brand. The training was not just about ticking off a corporate checkbox, it was about instilling a fundamental belief that respect for others, no matter their race, class, or appearance, was a core principle that could not be ignored. He wanted his employees to know that they were not just representatives of a luxury brand, they were ambassadors of respect, and equality. As he watched the changes take place, Jason saw the transformation that began to unfold within his stores. Employees who had once been silent, who had quietly endured the same biases and prejudices, began to speak up. They shared their own experiences of discrimination, their own stories of being overlooked or treated unfairly. For the first time, Jason saw his staff feel seen, heard, and valued. The conversations that began during those diversity and inclusion sessions were difficult at times, sometimes uncomfortable, but they were necessary. They were the conversations that Jason wished had happened years ago, conversations that he knew had the potential to heal wounds, to break down barriers, and to create a culture where respect wasn't just a policy, but a lived experience. What struck Jason the most was how the training programs began to ripple through the company, changing not just how employees interacted with customers, but how they viewed each other. The walls of division began to crumble, and in their place, a sense of unity began to emerge. People began to see each other not as competitors or adversaries, but as partners in a shared mission. They began to understand that the company's success was not just about profits, it was about building an environment where everyone felt safe, respected, and included. For Jason, the change was both personal and professional. He had spent so much of his life proving that he belonged in spaces where people like him weren't expected to succeed. He had fought tooth and nail to earn his place at the table. But as he stood in his stores, watching his employees interact with customers in new, meaningful ways, he realized that the fight for respect wasn't just about proving others wrong, it was about creating a space where respect was the foundation of everything they did. He wasn't just changing his company, he was changing the culture of an entire industry, one that had long been rooted in exclusivity, privilege, and prejudice. The true power of respect and equality, Jason realized, wasn't in the way people acknowledged his success or the accolades they bestowed upon him, it was in the way people treated each other, regardless of their background. It was about creating an environment where everyone, no matter their race, class, or appearance, was treated with the dignity they deserved. And that, more than anything, was what Jason had worked for all along. Not just an empire of luxury, but an empire of respect, inclusion, and equality. That was the legacy he wanted to leave. Institutional change. Jason Westbrook had spent the majority of his life overcoming obstacles. As a black man in a predominantly white industry, he had learned early on that the world wasn't always going to treat him with the respect he deserved. There would be people who doubted him, dismissed him, or tried to undermine his achievements simply because of his race. But Jason was not the type of man to back down from a challenge. He had fought against every barrier that had been placed in his way, and he had emerged victorious, building an empire in the luxury retail world that was traditionally exclusive, conservative, and resistant to change. But the incident at his Soho store had shaken Jason to his core. When his manager, Alex Mitchell, had made the decision to treat him his own boss like a mere customer, unworthy of respect, it had highlighted something Jason had long suspected. The work he had done to build his company wasn't enough to eradicate the systemic issues of prejudice and exclusion that had so long plagued the industry. It was not just an isolated incident, it was a symptom of a deeper cultural problem that Jason realized had to be addressed from the inside out. Jason knew that for real change to happen, it couldn't just be about holding one person accountable. It couldn't be about singling out a single employee or firing a manager who had fallen short of his expectations. It had to be about creating a fundamental shift in the culture of his entire company, a shift that would send a clear message to everyone, both internally and externally. Respect, inclusion, and equality were not optional. They were the backbone of the organization, the very core of what his brand stood for. He had worked too hard to build a business that valued quality and luxury to allow it to become tainted by the very prejudice he had fought to overcome. Jason realized that the issue wasn't just about addressing individual behavior, it was about changing the systems and structures within his company that had allowed those biases to go unchecked for so long. It was about recognizing that to truly create an inclusive environment, the company needed more than just surface-level changes. It needed a complete cultural overhaul. This wasn't something that could be fixed by a few policy updates or one-off diversity training sessions. It had to be something woven into the fabric of the company, a change that would be embedded into the very DNA of the brand. With that realization in mind, Jason made a decisive move. He introduced a company-wide diversity and inclusion program that would touch every aspect of the business. This program wasn't going to be a checkbox, something employees could breeze through just to fulfill a corporate requirement. Jason was determined that this would be something that would change the way people saw one another, the way they treated each other, and the way they interacted with customers. It would address not just racial bias, but all forms of discrimination, creating a company culture where every employee understood the importance of respecting others no matter their race, gender, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic background. The rollout of the program was a massive undertaking. Jason didn't just want diversity training to be a one-time event, where employees would sit through a seminar and forget everything as soon as they left the room. He wanted it to be ongoing, something that would constantly challenge people to reflect on their assumptions, their behaviors, and their attitudes. The training would be designed to facilitate uncomfortable but necessary conversations. It would ask tough questions, encourage honest self-reflection, and push everyone to confront their biases, not just the biases of others, but their own. The heart of the program would be about education. Jason wanted his employees to understand that bias wasn't something that just appeared in overt, explicit forms. It could be subtle, insidious, and even unconscious. People didn't always realize they were carrying these biases, but that didn't make them any less harmful. The training would offer practical tools and strategies to help employees recognize and confront their biases. But it wouldn't stop there. Jason knew that true change would only happen if his staff felt empowered to speak out when they saw something wrong. The program would teach them not only how to be better allies, but how to hold each other accountable in a supportive, constructive way. Jason didn't just want the managers or the higher-ups to go through this training. He wanted every employee in the company, from the top to the bottom, to be involved. He knew that every person in his stores, whether they were the ones selling the bags or the ones overseeing the operations, had a responsibility to create an inclusive environment. That meant shifting the way the company approached hiring, the way it promoted people, and the way it interacted with customers. It was about ensuring that every person in the company knew their worth, that they felt valued, and that they understood their role in shaping the company's culture. The impact of this institutional change was immediate, but it wasn't easy. The first few weeks of the program were filled with discomfort as employees began to reflect on their own biases, many of which they hadn't even realized existed. For some, it was a difficult process. Old habits were hard to break, and some employees resisted the idea of having their assumptions challenged. But Jason didn't expect this to be an overnight transformation. He knew that change, especially cultural change, took time, but it was necessary. For every person who resisted, there were others who embraced the program, eager to learn, grow, and help foster a new, more inclusive environment. One of the most rewarding aspects of the program was seeing the conversations that began to unfold across the company. Employees who had previously been quiet about their experiences of discrimination started to speak up. They shared their stories of exclusion, of being treated differently because of their appearance or background. These conversations were powerful, not because they were easy, but because they gave everyone in the company a chance to hear from one another, to understand each other's struggles, and to build empathy. Jason knew that these conversations were the foundation of true change. They were the moments when the company's culture began to shift, when respect and equality became not just words on a page but the lived experience of everyone in the organization. The changes weren't just in the training sessions. They began to show up in the everyday interactions between employees, in the way customers were greeted, and in the overall atmosphere of the stores. Jason began to see his vision come to life. The subtle biases that had once been so pervasive began to diminish, replaced by a greater awareness of the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. The staff who had once been hesitant or unsure of how to approach customers now took pride in offering exceptional service, regardless of a customer's appearance. And perhaps most importantly, Jason saw the impact the changes had on the customers who walked into his stores. They could feel the difference. The warm, inclusive environment he had always wanted for his business was finally becoming a reality. Customers who had once felt unwelcome or overlooked now felt like they belonged. They were seen, they were valued, and they were respected. Not because of the amount of money they spent, but because of who they were as individuals. For Jason, this wasn't just about creating a more profitable company, it was about creating a company that reflected the values he held dear. It was about building something that would stand as a beacon for others in the industry, showing that change was possible. He wasn't just changing the way his business operated, he was changing the industry itself, one store at a time. And that, to him, was the real measure of success. The work was far from finished, but Jason knew that he had set the foundation for a company where respect, inclusion, and equality weren't just ideals but the very core of everything they did. A shift in atmosphere. When Jason Westbrook walked back into his Soho store weeks after the confrontation with Alex Mitchell, he wasn't sure what to expect. The atmosphere was, at first, unremarkable, special fanfare, no signs that something had shifted. On the surface, everything appeared normal. The luxurious displays glimmering under the carefully designed lighting, the polished marble floors reflecting the movement of both staff and customers. But Jason knew better than anyone that things were rarely as they appeared. Beneath the surface, the air felt different. It wasn't just the aesthetic of the store, it was the mood, the energy, the unspoken understanding that had settled among the employees. There was a quiet confidence in the way the staff moved, a kind of purpose behind their actions, and Jason could feel it. The change was subtle, but profound. It wasn't something that could be seen with the eyes alone, it was something that resonated in the way the employees now treated every customer who walked through the door, in the way they interacted with one another, in the way the air felt when you entered the store. It was as though the walls of indifference that had once loomed over the space had been quietly torn down, brick by brick, replaced by an openness that allowed for something far more powerful: respect. For Jason, this transformation wasn't just about fixing a broken store or addressing an isolated incident. It was about something much larger, something that reflected the kind of leader he had become and the kind of culture he wanted to build. When he had decided to implement the company-wide diversity and inclusion program, he knew it would take time for things to change. He knew that the process of reshaping the culture wouldn't be an overnight success, but he also understood that true change starts from the inside out. It's not enough to tell people what to do or expect them to simply adopt new behaviors because they're asked to. Change has to come from within. It has to be felt, lived, and reflected in every action, every word, and every gesture. Jason knew that when people truly understood the power of respect, when they could feel the weight of what it meant to treat every individual with dignity, the atmosphere of an entire organization could shift. The change wasn't going to be flashy or immediate, but it was real. It was as though the store had been infused with a new spirit, one that recognized that every customer deserved the same level of care, no matter who they were, how they looked, or how much money they had to spend. As Jason moved through the store, he noticed the difference immediately. The employees greeted him not with forced smiles or nervous energy, but with genuine warmth. Their eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while, Jason felt truly seen. He wasn't just another face walking through the door, he was a person, a customer, someone worthy of respect. And as he observed the way the staff interacted with other customers, he saw the same behavior reflected back at them. There was no longer a hesitation when a person entered the store, no longer a dividing line that separated one type of customer from another. Everyone was treated with the same courtesy, the same level of attention, the same respect. Jason could see the shift in their eyes. The way the staff had once looked at him with judgment or skepticism was gone. Now, there was a quiet understanding that every customer, regardless of appearance, background, or status, deserved to be treated like a valued guest. Jason had witnessed how difficult it had been for some employees to accept this change, how hard it had been to challenge ingrained behaviors and biases. But now, in the space of a few short weeks, it was clear that the message had gotten through. Respect wasn't just something they were told to offer, it was something they understood, something they had internalized, and now, something they practiced with ease. But it wasn't just the way the employees interacted with customers that struck Jason. It was the way they interacted with one another. He had seen the division that once existed among the staff, the unspoken hierarchy, that had silently separated people by their perceived importance or role. The senior staff often carried themselves with an air of superiority, while others were relegated to the background. It was an atmosphere of quiet competition, where some employees were made to feel invisible, and others were treated as if they were more worthy of attention. But as Jason looked around now, he saw a shift in the way the staff collaborated. There was a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. They worked together, not as individuals striving for personal success, but as a team working toward a common goal. This was the true power of institutional change. It wasn't about creating a policy that told people what they could and couldn't do. It was about creating a cultural shift where people began to recognize the intrinsic value of respect and equality. It was about making it clear that every person, no matter their role or background, had something valuable to contribute to the organization. It was about building an environment where everyone felt empowered to bring their full selves to work, knowing that they were not only welcome, but appreciated. Jason knew that the road to creating this atmosphere hadn't been easy. The changes that had taken place in such a short time were a testament to the hard work and dedication of his employees. They had been willing to look within, to confront their own biases, and to accept that treating everyone with respect was not a choice, it was a necessity. And the result was a store that felt different, a company that felt different. There was a new kind of energy in the air, one that didn't come from the glossy advertisements or the high-end products. It came from the people, from the way they treated one another, and from the genuine care they showed every customer who walked through the door. Jason felt a quiet sense of pride as he watched his employees interact with the customers. It wasn't the kind of pride that came from a successful business deal or a new product launch. It wasn't the pride of a man who had built an empire. No, this pride came from something far more meaningful. The knowledge that his company had become a place where respect was the foundation, where every person who entered felt valued, no matter who they were. As he wandered through the store, Jason smiled to himself. The shift in atmosphere wasn't just a reflection of the changes he had initiated, it was a reflection of the people who had embraced the change and made it their own. He realized that true success wasn't just about building an empire that could weather any storm. It was about creating a space where everyone, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their income, could feel safe, seen, and heard. And that was the legacy Jason Westbrook wanted to leave behind. A company that not only stood for luxury, but also for respect, equality, and humanity. The changes were still in their early stages, but for the first time in a long while, Jason felt the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had created something far more lasting than a business. He had created a culture that would continue to grow, evolve, and thrive, rooted in the simple but powerful idea that respect and equality must always come first. Jason's leadership. Jason Westbrook had always viewed leadership not as a title, but as a responsibility and obligation to not just guide others, but to uplift, challenge, and inspire them to be better. It was never about control or power for him. Instead, it was about creating a vision, setting a standard, and showing by example the kind of integrity and respect he expected from those who followed him. But as the years had gone by, Jason had begun to realize that true leadership, wasn't just about taking charge when things went well. It was about stepping up in the most difficult moments, when challenges arose, and when the future seemed uncertain. Leadership meant making difficult decisions, taking risks, and, most of all, confronting uncomfortable truths. 7, when those truths were about the culture you had spent your life building. Jason's leadership had always been driven by an unwavering belief in the potential for change. From the beginning, he had built his luxury retail empire on the idea that luxury was not just about wealth or exclusivity, it was about inclusion, accessibility, and respect for everyone, regardless of their background. The idea that anyone, no matter their skin color, gender, or social status, could walk into his stores and feel like they belonged was more than just a business strategy. It was a fundamental belief that guided every decision he made. But it wasn't enough to say these things. Jason knew that to truly lead, he had to live by these principles, to demonstrate them through every action, every decision, and every interaction. When the situation at his Soho store with manager Alex Mitchell unfolded, It forced Jason to confront something he had been unwilling to admit for too long. Despite all the success he had achieved, despite the empire he had built, the work was far from finished. His company, which had once been a beacon for diversity, respect, and inclusivity, had allowed toxic behavior to slip through the cracks. It wasn't just a bad apple in the barrel, it was a reflection of something deeper within the culture. For Jason, this realization was a blow, not because it challenged his business acumen, but because it challenged his identity as a leader. As a leader, Jason had always been proud of the company he had built. He had spent years overcoming obstacles, proving doubters wrong, and shattering expectations. He had built a company that provided opportunity, not just for customers, but for employees. He had created an environment where people from all walks of life could come together and thrive. But the realization that he had let something so crucial slip through the cracks, something that ran counter to the very foundation of his values, was painful. It was the kind of moment that could shake a leader to their core. And yet, in the face of that challenge, Jason didn't retreat or shy away from the responsibility. He stepped forward. Leadership, Jason realized, wasn't about waiting for problems to resolve themselves. It wasn't about blaming others or hoping someone else would step in to fix things. It was about owning the issue, taking responsibility, and ensuring that the culture he had fought so hard to create was aligned with his values, even when that meant confronting uncomfortable truths about the way the company had operated. He understood that real leaders didn't just build successful businesses. They built businesses that stood for something bigger than profits or prestige. They created organizations that were committed to doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was uncomfortable. So, when Jason walked into the Soho store, dressed not as the CEO, but as a regular customer, he wasn't just investigating a single manager's behavior, he was testing the very foundation of his leadership. He had spent years creating a company that believed in respect and equality, but it was clear that these values had not been fully embraced by everyone. As he witnessed the cold, dismissive treatment he received at the hands of Alex Mitchell, Jason didn't just feel the sting of personal humiliation. He saw a reflection of the larger problem within the company. He saw how easy it was for people to slip into judgment, to assume that someone like him, regardless of his success, didn't belong. And it was in that moment, walking out of the store, that Jason knew he couldn't simply ignore what had happened. He couldn't walk away from this challenge. He had to act. True leadership, Jason understood, wasn't about maintaining a perfect image. It was about authenticity and accountability. So, the next day, he returned to the Soho store, not as a silent customer, but as the powerful force behind the brand, unveiling his identity to Alex and the entire team. But Jason wasn't looking for an apology or a chance to punish Alex. What he sought was a lesson that would resonate not only with Alex, but with every employee who represented his brand. This wasn't about retribution. It was about restoring the integrity of the company and showing everyone that respect and equality weren't just lofty ideals. They were the foundation of everything Jason's company stood for. When he stood before Alex, calmly confronting him about his actions, Jason didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment was already heavy enough. He didn't berate Alex, nor did he humiliate him. Instead, he used his position to teach not just Alex, but everyone who was watching that true leadership wasn't about wielding power to get what you wanted. It was about using your power to lift others, to guide them toward a better way of thinking and being. Jason's words weren't just for Alex, they were a message to the entire team, a message that reinforced what he had always believed. Everyone, no matter who they were or what they looked like, deserved to be treated with respect. But Jason didn't stop there. The lesson wasn't just in the confrontation. It was in the actions that followed. He didn't fire Alex outright. Instead, he gave him a chance to redeem himself, to learn what it meant, to serve every customer with the same level of respect and care, regardless of their background. Jason could have made an example of Alex, could have made him an object of scorn for his mistakes. But Jason knew that true growth came from the opportunity to learn, to reflect, and to change. And by putting Alex in a position where he had to interact with every customer with humility and kindness, Jason ensured that the lesson was not just learned, was lived. What happened after that confrontation, however, was what truly reflected Jason's strength. as a leader. Instead of letting this moment define him by his success or the authority he held, he focused on the future. Jason knew that leadership wasn't just about one moment in time. It was about building a legacy, a culture, a company that was capable of evolving. He didn't just want his company to be successful. He wanted it to be a place where people felt empowered, seen, and respected, regardless of who they were or where they came from. And this commitment to equality wasn't just a corporate initiative. It became a part of Jason's leadership philosophy that he would instill in every corner of his company. Jason's leadership wasn't defined by his ability to lead in times of calm or stability. It was defined by how he responded in the face of adversity. He showed that leadership is about taking responsibility, making tough decisions, and guiding people to a better understanding of themselves and their role in the world. He didn't shy away from difficult moments. Instead, he leaned into them, using them as an opportunity for growth for himself, his employees, and the entire company. True leaders, Jason understood, don't just build businesses. They build cultures that stand the test of time, rooted in values that transcend profit and prestige. Jason Westbrook's leadership wasn't just about building a brand, it was about creating a company that reflected his belief in respect, equality, and integrity. It was about using his power and influence to uplift others and to challenge his team to be better, to do better. And that, in the end, was the true mark of his leadership. A leader who leads not just with vision, but with heart. Jason Westbrook's journey is one of resilience, leadership, and the unwavering pursuit of equality. Starting from humble beginnings, he defied expectations and built a thriving empire in the luxury retail industry. Despite his success, Jason was not immune to the pervasive biases that still lingered in society, even within his own company. When his store manager, Alex Mitchell, made assumptions about him based on his appearance, it became the catalyst for a deeper examination of his company's culture. Jason didn't respond with anger or retribution. Instead, he confronted the issue head-on, using the moment to educate and transform his company's approach to respect, inclusivity, and equality. His leadership was defined by accountability, compassion, and the courage to initiate systemic change, creating an environment where every individual was treated with dignity, regardless of their background. Through his actions, Jason not only changed the course of his business, but sent a powerful message about the importance of embracing respect and equality at every level. The lesson from Jason's story is clear. Leadership isn't just about success, it's about creating an environment where integrity, respect, and fairness are at the heart of everything you do. Whether in business, relationships, or personal growth, true leadership is about facing challenges head-on, taking responsibility, and fostering inclusivity. In our own lives, we can apply this lesson by being mindful of our own biases, advocating for equality, and leading by example. It's not enough to stand for change, we must actively work to create it, starting with how we treat others. Respect, empathy, and fairness should guide our actions every day, in both big and small ways. Thank you for joining this journey of kindness, transformation, and true wealth. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for more inspiring stories that remind us all of the power of generosity, resilience, and the unexpected ways lives can change. See you next time.